My name is Celeste Hanley, 29 years old. The word embarrassment first latched onto me when I was 14, like a stain that refused to wash out. That Christmas, all I wanted was a computer. A real one, not the family's clunky old desktop that froze every 10 minutes. I imagined unwrapping a slim, silver machine that would open up new worlds. Instead, I got clothes, and when I looked disappointed, my mother laughed lightly and explained to the relatives, "She's going through a phase." Her voice was full of that patient tone parents use when excusing a child's temporary foolishness. All this computer nonsense will pass once she discovers boys and makeup. It didn't pass. 15 years later, that phase had evolved into the family's most reliable source of discomfort. By then, my brother Marcus had built himself into a Wall Street wonder boy. A rising investment banker, polished and charming, the kind of man people trusted immediately because he looked the part. Marcus's path was linear, prestigious, and universally admired. My path? Let's just say it was the one that required careful explanation at dinner parties. The family had learned to frame me as the one who never quite figured out how to translate intelligence into respectability. That pattern was set early. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, the spotlight still found Marcus, who'd made varsity football. When MIT awarded me a full scholarship, the family toast was about Marcus's acceptance to Harvard. When I graduated summa cum laude with dual degrees in computer science and electrical engineering, the champagne corks popped, not for me, but for Marcus landing his first Goldman Sachs internship. Straight A's in mathematics were nice, but football trophies sat proudly on the mantelpiece, polished before guests arrived. My academic honors were briefly mentioned in holiday newsletters, overshadowed by detailed stories of Marcus's internships, promotions, and networking connections. The disconnect widened as we entered adulthood. Marcus married Jennifer, a girl from a good family in Connecticut, right on schedule. Their relationship moved like clockwork. Dating, engagement, wedding, child. Everything aligned with expectations. Their life fit neatly into dinner party conversations. Meanwhile, I returned home after MIT, not because I failed, but because I had an idea too wild to explain in simple sentences. My parents said I needed time to figure things out. What they meant was, Celeste is lost. Lost looked like me, sitting in the basement, surrounded by towers of servers, humming circuit boards, and prototypes that even I barely understood in their early stages. Quantum processors. Algorithms that behaved like puzzles wrapped in riddles. A language of electricity and mathematics no one in my family spoke. "She's always been different," my mom would say when neighbors asked about me. She delivered the phrase with a sympathetic shrug, as though I had been born with a minor defect she hoped might correct itself one day. Very bright, but not particularly practical. She'll figure it out eventually. The subtext, Celeste is brilliant but useless. Marcus was everything they'd hoped for in a child. Harvard MBA, corner office, a wife who looked perfect in family photos, a house in a neighborhood that proved they had made it. At 32, he was the family's crown jewel. Me? At 29, I was still figuring things out. According to the consensus, I was pursuing hobbies that might impress other technical nerds but meant nothing in the real world. The truth was different. That basement had grown into something closer to a research facility than a temporary workspace. 8 years of obsessive trial, error, and progress had led me to breakthroughs in quantum computing applications. But trying to explain quantum entanglement at Thanksgiving? Pointless. My words evaporated in the air like steam, met with polite nods and vacant stares. Dad's standard line was, "She's very dedicated to her research." He liked that word, research. It sounded respectable enough, as if I worked for a lab or university. It certainly sounded more acceptable than, "Our daughter plays with computers in the basement." The Christmas gathering that year was particularly crowded. Cousins, uncles, aunts, family friends, all packed into our parents' colonial-style house. The smell of roasted turkey mingled with the sharp scent of pine from the massive tree in the living room. Fairy lights blinked rhythmically as if applauding Marcus's every story. These events were showcases, a chance for relatives to parade their success and compare milestones. Uncle Robert had expanded his construction business into a multi-million-dollar company, Aunt Patricia's design firm was featured in glossy magazines. Cousin David had just been made partner at a law firm. Achievements were currency, and Marcus had plenty. Through the kitchen doorway, I could see him, standing near the fireplace, the picture of modest confidence as relatives swarmed him. Dad boasted to Uncle Robert, "Marcus just closed a $200 million acquisition deal. The client requested him personally for his reputation in handling international transactions." Laughter, clinking glasses, words of admiration. Marcus accepted each with the easy humility of someone accustomed to it. Meanwhile, I stood in the kitchen arranging appetizers. My role, background labor. I spread crackers with soft cheese while my brother's accomplishments filled the air like trumpets. 20 minutes passed as they discussed his deal structures, regulatory hurdles, global expansion strategies. That was a language everyone there understood. Money, growth, tangible wins. Finally, Aunt Patricia asked, her tone deliberately careful, "And what about Celeste?" Dad hesitated. Barely, but I caught it, the flicker of discomfort in his eyes. "She's still working with computers," he said. His voice hovered on the word computers, like it was a foreign tongue. "Doing some kind of technical consulting work. Very good with that sort of thing." That sort of thing. The phrase wrapped my years of work into a neat, dismissive package. The truth, I had been building and scaling technology companies under the radar, but the details were too complex to unpack, and the results too unconventional to fit their definition of success. "Is she seeing anyone?" Aunt Patricia pressed, moving effortlessly from career to the other metric of acceptable adulthood. "She's very focused on her work," Mom said quickly, her diplomatic way of saying, "Still single, probably always will be." The subtext wasn't lost on me. My computer hobby had come at the cost of family-approved milestones: marriage, children, an office job with a steady title. And at nearly 30, those absences were flashing red warning lights to my family. As I carried out a tray of cheese cubes, I heard Patricia lower her voice to Mom. "I worry she's missing her window. At her age, it becomes difficult to start over if those computers don't lead anywhere." Their voices faded into the holiday din, but the words stayed sharp in my ears. I kept arranging plates, smiling, pretending not to hear. Pretending, as I had learned, was the only way to survive these nights. From the living room, Marcus's wife Jennifer announced in her lilting voice, "Uncle Marcus is taking us skiing in the Alps. The resort even has a private helicopter." Her 3-year-old daughter squealed on cue, tugging at Jennifer's pearls. The room erupted in admiration. "Marcus's bonus this year has been extraordinary," Jennifer added, her smile gleaming with pride. I sat in my usual corner chair, the family's unspoken placement for me. Present, but peripheral. My vantage point let me observe without interfering. "Celeste, tell everyone about your computer work," Mom suggested during a lull, her tone encouraging, yet cautious. "It's mostly technical stuff," I answered smoothly, my rehearsed shield. "Database management, system optimization, quantum applications. Boring unless you're into it." Marcus chuckled, just loud enough. "Celeste has always been more comfortable with machines than people." His grin carried condescension polished into charm. "Some people just have different strengths." Laughter rippled, nods followed, consensus sealed. I sipped my wine, said nothing. Inside, though, I felt a quiet hum, the same steady vibration that filled my basement lab. I knew what they didn't. My machines were no hobby. They were the future. And one day, this family would find out just how wrong they had been. The living room glowed with the warmth of the fireplace, but for me, the heat came from the scrutiny. Every conversation seemed to orbit Marcus, his promotion cycles, his daughter's preschool acceptance, the Swiss vacation waiting after the new year. The air buzzed with admiration, like static you couldn't shake off. I knew the rhythm of these gatherings by heart. Marcus spoke, the family applauded. Jennifer added a detail, and the applause doubled. Their life was a catalog of achievements designed for display. Every story they shared reinforced their success, not just as individuals, but as proof that our family produced people who mattered. I had nothing to add to that symphony. My silence had become a familiar instrument in the background. Jennifer leaned forward on the couch, perfectly composed, in her cream cashmere dress. "The headmaster at Riverside Prep personally called to welcome our daughter," she said, her smile glowing with satisfaction. "Apparently her assessments place her in the 99th percentile." Relatives gasped with impressed approval. Aunt Patricia dabbed at her lips with a napkin. She's exceptional, just like her parents. I caught Marcus's subtle nod, the way his chest lifted ever so slightly. He loved moments like these, when admiration rolled toward him as naturally as the tide. From my corner, I fiddled with the rim of my wineglass. It was crystal, polished to perfection, catching reflections of the firelight. A detail, maybe, but I noticed details when no one noticed me. Mom gave me another of her careful nudges. Celeste, you've been working on some projects, haven't you? I swallowed my sigh. The script was always the same. My projects, my work, my vague existence, they were mentioned out of obligation, like dusting the neglected corner of the room. Yes, I said. Still early stages, but potentially meaningful. I knew what they heard. Another excuse. Another hobby. The air filled with polite nods, smiles stretched thin with skepticism. Uncle Robert shifted his weight and asked Marcus a question about mergers. Conversation slid past me like water. I leaned back, letting the voices blend into a muffled hum. My eyes wandered across the room, ornaments dangling from the tree, gold and crimson, glittering under soft yellow lights. One of them reflected Marcus's face, distorted but still commanding the room. I thought of the lab in the basement, the humming servers, the glow of monitors, the delicate calculations running in silence. Down there, numbers and circuits bent to my will. Up here, I bent myself to theirs. Jennifer's laugh broke into my thoughts. Marcus surprised me with a bracelet last week, from Cartier. He said it was just a little something for the holidays. She stretched her wrist toward Aunt Patricia, who clasped it admiringly. I felt the sting of memory. Christmas at 16, when I received a second-hand sweater while Marcus unwrapped a new gaming console. Mom had said, "You don't need all those gadgets. Be grateful." Grateful. Aunt Patricia's voice pulled me back. "It's so important to have interests, Celeste," she said, her tone syrupy sweet. "Hobbies keep the mind active, even if they don't lead anywhere." Hobbies. The word landed like a dart. My life's work, condensed into the same category as stamp collecting. I smiled thinly. Yes, hobbies are important. Dad cleared his throat. Celeste gave me a book on quantum computing. Very advanced stuff. I'm sure it's fascinating to people who understand. His attempt at appreciation only highlighted the gap. The relatives chuckled softly, the kind of laughter people use when they don't know what else to say. I took another sip of wine. The liquid burned down my throat, warm and sharp. Later, during the gift exchange, the hierarchy played out in objects. Marcus and Jennifer unwrapped Italian scarves, rare wine, designer jewelry. Their gifts to others were equally lavish. My offerings were practical. Books, software, small devices to make life easier. Useful, but unimpressive. Dad turned over the quantum computing text I'd given him. Looks complicated. I'll have to find time to skim it. We both knew he never would. Jennifer's gift to me was a scented candle from a luxury brand. "For your workspace," she said with a smile. "A little relaxation while you tinker." Tinker. The word cut deeper than she realized. I thanked her anyway, as expected. After dinner, conversations turned toward the coming year. Marcus outlined his trajectory at Goldman. Jennifer discussed private schools. Robert spoke of new construction contracts. Patricia of celebrity clients. Each update was a trophy placed on the invisible family shelf. When the spotlight finally reached me, Cousin Sarah tilted her head, her expression carefully neutral. "Any big plans for next year, Celeste?" Her voice carried curiosity, but underneath it lay something sharper, skepticism, maybe even pity. I opened my mouth, but Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and excused himself for a quick call. The timing, as always, was perfect. His importance eclipsed mine effortlessly. When he returned, Dad leaned forward, his eyes full of admiration. Was it urgent? "Just finalizing details for next week's board presentation," Marcus said casually, his tone humble but tinged with pride. "We're announcing a major expansion. Should set me up well for the next promotion cycle." Applause followed, as though he'd just delivered a speech. I faded further into the wallpaper. Still, inside, I felt that hum again. That quiet vibration, like the servers in my basement. A reminder that my life wasn't as empty as they thought. Later, in the kitchen, Marcus joined me as I stacked dessert plates. He lowered his voice, speaking as though offering a secret favor. "It's not too late, Celeste. I could get you into Goldman, maybe in the tech support division. Nothing glamorous, but steady work, good benefits. You'd be perfect." He meant it sincerely, I knew that, but sincerity could still slice. To him, tech support was the ceiling of my potential. Thanks, I said quietly, my smile practiced. I'll think about it. He nodded, satisfied with his generosity, before returning to the center of attention. I stayed behind, staring at the crumbs on the plates. My brother thought he'd offered me a lifeline, but in my world, the one humming beneath our feet, that lifeline would have been an anchor. The night wound down. Coats were collected, cheeks kissed, promises made to stay in touch. I lingered in my corner, the designated spot for family disappointments. Cousin Sarah lingered too, her glass of wine nearly empty. She studied me with the curiosity of someone who thought they'd solved a puzzle. Her lips curved in a faint smile, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes. Judgment, yes, but also anticipation, as though she were preparing to say what others would not. I shivered, though the fire was still roaring. Something was coming, I could feel it, and it would not be kind. The living room had quieted. The fire had settled into a low crackle, glowing embers casting shadows that flickered against polished wood and expensive fabrics. The air carried that heavy post-dinner lull, a mix of wine, fatigue, and unfinished business. Marcus lounged in the center chair, Jennifer by his side, her hand resting on his knee like a seal of ownership. Around them, the relatives shifted into smaller conversations, but I could feel something coiling beneath the surface, an unsaid truth pressing against the room's fragile politeness. It was Cousin Sarah who broke first, a glass of Chardonnay in hand, her voice edged with the looseness of someone who had drunk just enough to feel bold. You know, she said, looking straight at me, I think it's time someone said what we're all thinking. The chatter faded like someone had turned down the volume knob. All eyes flicked toward her, then toward me. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I kept my expression still. Sarah stood, shoulders squared, claiming the floor as though she'd rehearsed this. Celeste, you're becoming an embarrassment to this family. The words dropped like a stone into the room. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. I didn't flinch, not outwardly. She pressed on, her cheeks flushed with wine and conviction. You're almost 30. Still single. Still hiding in that basement, tinkering with computers like a teenager. Meanwhile, Marcus is making waves in the real world. You refuse help, you reject advice. And what do you have to show for it? A ripple moved through the relatives. Some avoided my eyes. Others nodded, almost imperceptibly. Agreement without ownership. Mom shifted uncomfortably, dabbing her napkin against her lips. Dad looked down at his hands, twisting his wedding ring. Neither spoke. Marcus exhaled, slow and deliberate. His face was calm, but his eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, flicked toward me with a mixture of pity and quiet satisfaction. Finally, someone said it, he murmured. Jennifer squeezed his knee, murmuring something I couldn't hear, though her smirk said enough. Sarah's voice rose, finding strength in the silence. You had every advantage. Brilliant grades, a supportive family, opportunities most people dream of, and you squandered it. 15 years wasted on, what? Projects that lead nowhere? At some point, potential expires, Celeste, and yours already has. Her words echoed, bouncing off the walls, off the ornaments, off my very skin. I let the silence stretch, refusing to give her the reaction she craved. Inside, though, I felt something else. Not anger, not shame, but a simmering clarity. Marcus leaned forward, his voice calm, almost gentle. Look, Celeste, Sarah's harsh, but she's not wrong. You're too smart to keep drifting. Let me help you. I can get you into Goldman. Tech support, maybe. It's steady. It's respectable. It'll get you out of that basement. He meant it as kindness. That was the sting. To Marcus, pulling strings for an entry-level support job was a rescue mission. In his world, it was the best I could hope for. I studied him, then Sarah, then the silent gallery of relatives whose eyes flickered with relief that the words had been spoken aloud. Finally, I spoke. I understand. My voice was calm, too calm. Sarah's shoulders dropped, triumphant. Good. At least you're honest about it. Marcus leaned back, satisfied, as if the intervention had succeeded. Jennifer smiled tightly, the kind of smile that said balance had been restored, but they didn't hear what I didn't say. I understand wasn't surrender, it was acknowledgement. I understood them, every assumption, every limit they placed on me, every ounce of disappointment they carried. I understood it all. What they didn't understand was me. The night staggered forward after that, but the air never recovered. Conversations became forced, laughter brittle. Every glance toward me carried the aftertaste of Sarah's words. I moved through it like a ghost, invisible yet newly defined, as if my role as family failure had finally been carved in stone. When Mom began clearing dessert plates, I joined her in the kitchen. The sound of running water filled the silence between us. She kept her eyes on the sink. Sarah was too blunt, she said finally, but she's not wrong to worry. I set down the plates. I know. She turned, searching my face for cracks. When she found none, she sighed. We just want you to be happy, Celeste. I know, I repeated, my voice quiet. Dad poked his head in. Don't take it too hard. Families say things they don't always mean. But he didn't deny it either. Back in the living room, Marcus was fielding questions about investment strategies. Jennifer chatting about Swiss slopes. Sarah laughing as though she hadn't just ripped me open. I returned to my corner chair, folding myself into silence. My wine glass was nearly empty. I stared at the last drop swirling in the bottom, dark and heavy, and thought of the lab downstairs. The hum of the servers, the light of the monitors, the algorithms that didn't judge, didn't dismiss, didn't laugh. Down there, I wasn't an embarrassment. I was a creator. Up here, I was a cautionary tale. I tilted the glass, swallowed the last drop, and let the silence wrap around me. What they couldn't know, what they couldn't even imagine, was that their intervention had come too late, because the world was already shifting beneath their feet. And soon, very soon, the truth they had spent years ignoring would crash into this living room like a storm they couldn't stop. The evening was winding down, though the weight of Sarah's words still hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Relatives collected coats from the hallway, laughter returning in thin, brittle bursts, as though they were desperate to restore the evening's cheer. I remained in my corner chair, the shadows of the fire stretching long across the floor. The uneaten crumbs of dessert clung to my plate, forgotten. No one spoke to me, but I could feel the occasional glance, a mixture of pity, resignation, and the satisfaction that came from finally naming the family's shame. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, Jennifer leaning over his shoulder, whispering about ski resorts and flight times. Sarah was still flush with her own courage, laughing too loudly, her glass raised like a victory torch. It was almost over, and then Dad's phone rang. The ringtone was distinct, a crisp chime reserved for his most important contacts. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing. For a moment he hesitated, torn between holiday etiquette and professional obligation. Then he lifted it to his ear. "Richard," he said, his tone sharpening into professional warmth. "Merry Christmas to you too." Richard. Even from across the room, the name made my chest tighten. Richard Thompson, the business journalist Dad admired, the one who had interviewed him twice for articles on manufacturing trends. Dad often mentioned Richard like a badge of honor, proof that he had access to circles just beyond his reach. The room quieted. We could all hear Richard's voice, loud enough to carry through the phone. "Dave, sorry to intrude on Christmas, but I had to verify something for a story I'm working on." Dad straightened in his seat, gesturing for silence. Pride glowed faintly in his eyes. His most prestigious contact had called him, right here, in front of everyone. Richard continued, his tone brisk, businesslike. "Is your daughter, Celeste Hanley, really the one Forbes just named as America's youngest billionaire?" The words detonated in the room. Silence. Pure, suffocating silence. Even the fire seemed to pause, flames frozen in mid-dance. Dad's face drained of color, his mouth parting soundlessly. "I'm sorry, what?" Richard, oblivious to the earthquake he had just triggered, repeated, "Celeste Hanley, founder and CEO of Quantum Dynamics. Forbes released their list an hour ago. She's at the top, net worth estimated at $3.8 billion. We'd like an exclusive interview. Can you confirm she's your daughter?" Every pair of eyes in the room turned to me. Marcus's expression collapsed into disbelief, his lips parted but no sound escaping. Jennifer blinked rapidly, as though trying to clear a hallucination. Sarah's face drained pale, her wine glass trembling slightly in her hand. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "Celeste?" But Dad was still on the phone, his voice cracking. I don't understand. Are you sure?" Richard's tone brightened, animated by professional excitement. "Absolutely. The Forbes profile says she built quantum dynamics from her basement lab over the past 8 years, revolutionized quantum computing for financial modeling and data processing. The IPO last month shattered records. She's being called the most influential young entrepreneur of her generation." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. My heart raced, but my face was calm, unreadable. Years of silence had trained me well. Dad's hand shook as he held the phone, his eyes darting toward me, like a man staring at a stranger in his own home. She's right here, he finally managed. The relatives leaned forward, their disbelief palpable. Sarah's wine glass slipped from her fingers and landed on the carpet with a dull thud, spilling pale liquid across the fibers. She didn't even notice. Marcus's phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications. His thumbs moved automatically, pulling up articles, news alerts, financial updates. His eyes scanned the headlines, his face shifting through confusion, denial, and something else, something darker. Jennifer whispered, "Oh my God," her hand tightening on his arm. Richard's voice carried on, relentless. "Dave, this is monumental. Can you arrange for me to speak with her tonight? The story's already everywhere. Her work is expected to transform multiple industries. She's the story of the decade." Dad swallowed hard, his voice faint. Yes, I can." The silence in the room was unbearable. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice small, stripped of its earlier confidence. "Celeste, is this true?" I lifted my eyes, met hers, and simply said yes. No fanfare, no gloating, just truth. Mom pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Aunt Patricia fumbled for her phone, refreshing her newsfeed until the headline stared back at her. Cousin David muttered, "Holy hell." Marcus stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood. This doesn't make sense," he stammered. "Quantum dynamics, that's you? All those years? In the basement?" His voice cracked on the last word. "Yes," I said softly, "all those years." Jennifer leaned closer to him, whispering urgently. He shook his head, his eyes locked on me, as though I had suddenly transformed into someone unrecognizable. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air, the only sound in a room where reality had been rewritten. Dad's phone still hung in his hand, Richard's voice faint on the other end. "Dave, are you there?" Dad blinked, finally remembering. "Yes, Richard. She's my daughter. I'll have her call you back." He ended the call slowly, lowering the phone like it weighed 100 pounds. Then he turned to me, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell us?" The question cracked something inside me. Not anger, not triumph, just a quiet, tired ache. Because you never asked, because you never believed, because you only saw what I wasn't. I didn't speak those words. I only held his gaze, letting the silence answer for me. The room around us trembled with its own silence. Every face wore a new expression: disbelief, awe, regret, envy. The hierarchy of our family had been shattered in a single phone call. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the embarrassment. I was the storm. The room didn't feel like the same place anymore. Just minutes ago, the air had been thick with smug laughter and Marcus's stories about international deals. Now it was taut, humming with disbelief. The Christmas tree lights blinked on and off, illuminating faces frozen in stunned silence. Phones began to chime. Sarah's first, then Aunt Patricia's, then Uncle Robert's. Each screen lit up with the same headline: Forbes names Quantum Dynamics CEO, 29, youngest billionaire in America. Every ping was a nail in the coffin of their old perception of me. Marcus scrolled furiously, his face illuminated by the glow of his phone, his jaw clenched, his lips parted slightly. Jennifer leaned into him, whispering, but he didn't answer. His eyes flicked up at me, sharp with something I couldn't quite define. Jealousy, confusion, maybe fear. Sarah finally spoke, her voice cracking. I just called you an embarrassment." Her hand trembled as she set her wine glass on the table, though most of its contents were already on the carpet. "I didn't know." "No," I interrupted gently. "You knew exactly what you thought." The words hung there, quiet but heavy. Mom broke the silence, her hand clutching her chest. "Celeste, is it true? All those years in the basement, quantum dynamics?" "Yes," I said simply. Her eyes filled with tears. Dad looked away, ashamed. For once, neither of them had words. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. 3.8 billion. He whistled softly, shaking his head. That's more than my company has ever been worth." His tone wasn't admiration, it was envy. Aunt Patricia was refreshing her phone obsessively, reading aloud as though the printed words might anchor her disbelief. Forbes says Quantum Dynamics has government contracts pending. International investors lining up. Celeste Hanley's innovations will redefine the financial sector. She looked up at me, blinking fast. How could you not tell us? I let the question pass. It wasn't worth answering. Cousin David's lawyer brain clicked into gear. You'll need ironclad protections. IPO that big. Competitors will circle. Lawsuits, acquisitions, poaching. His voice was half advice, half probing for relevance. I could, if you need counsel, I'd be happy to. There it was, the shift. From dismissive to opportunistic in the span of 10 minutes. I didn't answer him either. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but sharp. This doesn't make sense. 8 years? You've been down there 8 years, and we thought you were wasting your time. Why didn't you tell us what you were doing? His tone demanded an explanation, as though I owed him one. I held his gaze, because you never listened. His mouth snapped shut. Jennifer touched his arm again, whispering urgently. He pulled away. For the first time, his perfect composure cracked. Sarah sank back into her chair, her face pale. I feel sick, she muttered. You should, I said quietly. The relatives shifted uncomfortably. My calm tone seemed to unsettle them more than anger ever could. Mom finally stepped forward, her voice trembling. Celeste, honey, we're proud of you. Truly. We didn't understand. Pride. The word was foreign, forced through gritted teeth. I nodded, but I didn't thank her. Dad tried next, his voice brittle. If this is all true, and clearly it is, then you've accomplished something extraordinary. But why hide it from us? Why let us think... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Because it was easier, I said. Easier to let you underestimate me than fight every single time you chose Marcus's trophies over my work. Easier to be invisible than to prove myself to people who never cared to look. The truth landed heavy, and no one argued. The quiet stretched. The fire popped. Outside, the wind rattled against the windows. Marcus's phone buzzed again, and his face tightened as he read it. He turned the screen toward Jennifer. I caught a glimpse. His industry contacts were already sending him the article. His sister, the Embarrassment, was now the most powerful name in the very circles he worked so hard to impress. His hand trembled as he set the phone down. Do you realize what this means? His tone was almost accusatory, as though my success had been a deliberate slight against him. Yes, I replied. I realize exactly what it means. The room shifted again. Some relatives leaned closer to me, eager to align themselves. Aunt Patricia asked if my company needed design consultants. Uncle Robert mentioned his construction contacts in case I wanted new office space. Cousin David circled back to legal services. It was almost laughable, the speed of their turn. Almost. Mom tried once more, her voice soft. Celeste, you've been working so hard, and we didn't see it. But maybe this can bring us closer. Her hope glimmered, fragile. But forgiveness wasn't that simple. Sarah suddenly stood, her eyes wet. I was cruel. I humiliated you. I don't know how to take that back. You can't, I said, my voice steady. But you can live with it. She sank back down, defeated. For the rest of the evening, no one mentioned Marcus's promotion, or Jennifer's ski trip, or Riverside Prep's phone call. Their world had tilted on its axis, and for once, I was at the center. But the shift didn't bring me joy, only clarity. I could see every emotion in their eyes, envy, guilt, pride, opportunism. None of it felt like love. None of it felt safe. The family I had lived my whole life trying to impress had revealed themselves completely. They hadn't wanted me to succeed. They'd only wanted me to conform. And now that I had succeeded beyond their comprehension, they didn't know whether to embrace me or fear me. The night dragged on with awkward attempts at small talk, but beneath every word lay the same realization. The balance of power had changed forever. When the last relative finally left, the house fell into an uneasy quiet. The fire had died down to embers. My parents busied themselves in the kitchen, their movements mechanical. Marcus and Jennifer stood by the door, coats in hand. He lingered for a moment, eyes locked on me. This changes everything, he said finally. Yes, I replied, it does. Neither of us smiled. He turned and walked out into the cold night, his shoulders stiff, his pride bruised. Jennifer followed silently. I sat alone in the glow of dying embers, the weight of their stares still clinging to my skin. I was no longer invisible, but visibility came with a cost. The house was finally quiet. The laughter, the boasting, the clinking glasses, all of it had drained away into the cold December night. Only the faint hum of the heater remained, accompanied by the dying crackle of the fireplace. I sat where I had been all evening, the corner chair, my designated place at every family gathering, but it no longer felt like the shadows. Tonight, the shadows had become my shield, and the spotlight had found me anyway. Mom emerged from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. Her eyes were red, as though she had been crying quietly while loading the dishwasher. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You should have told us," she said softly. "Not an accusation, not quite. More a plea." I set my glass down. "Would you have listened?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Dad stepped into the doorway behind her, his face lined deeper than I remembered. "We underestimated you," he admitted, his voice low. "All these years, we thought we were protecting you from disappointment, but maybe we were protecting ourselves from the truth, that we didn't understand you at all." It was the closest thing to an apology he had ever offered me. I nodded once. Maybe. He wanted me to absolve him, to absolve all of them. But forgiveness is not a gift handed out like Christmas presents. It is earned. Marcus and Jennifer had already gone, but the echo of Marcus's words lingered. This changes everything. He was right, it did. I rose from my chair, stretching my stiff legs. The air felt heavier upstairs than it ever had in the basement. Down there, silence had been my companion. Up here, silence was suffocating. I thought of the years I had spent hidden away, my family dismissing me as a cautionary tale while I built something that would outlive all of us. They thought invisibility was failure, but invisibility had been my strategy, my freedom. And now the invisibility was gone. Mom followed me to the hallway, her hand brushing my sleeve. "Celeste, we are proud of you, truly. We may not have shown it, but—" "Stop," I said, not unkindly. "Don't rewrite history now. You weren't proud. You were worried. You were ashamed. And tonight doesn't erase that." Her eyes filled again, tears clinging stubbornly before spilling. "Then what do we do?" "Nothing," I answered. "There's nothing to fix. You can't undo years of being invisible to you, and I can't undo the years of working in silence. We are where we are." She stepped back as though I had struck her, though my tone was calm. I turned toward the coat rack, slipping into my wool jacket. My hands moved slowly, deliberately. Each motion felt like a declaration of independence. Dad cleared his throat again, searching for words. "At least promise us you'll stay close. Family should stick together." I pulled on my gloves, meeting his eyes. Family should believe in each other. The unspoken words hung between us, and you didn't. The grandfather clock chimed softly, the sound marking midnight. Christmas Day was ending, a new day beginning. I walked to the door, pulling it open. The cold air rushed in, sharp and bracing, like the world itself reminding me I was alive, awake, free. Behind me, I heard Mom's voice crack. "Celeste, wait!" I paused in the doorway, the snow glittering under the porch light, flakes falling slow and silent. I didn't turn back. "Don't worry," I said, my voice steady. "You won't lose me, but you'll never see me the same way again." The words landed with the finality of a verdict. I stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots. The night was quiet, the air crisp, the stars sharp against the dark. Somewhere, a car engine hummed down the street, a reminder that the world beyond this house was already shifting with my name on every headline. For the first time, I felt no need to explain myself, not to them, not to anyone. The embarrassment, the failure, the family's hidden shame, all of those roles had died tonight, smothered by a single phone call that revealed what had been true all along. I hadn't been invisible, I had been underestimated, and that was their mistake to carry. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked down the path, each step dissolving the weight of years spent in the shadows. The night stretched wide, filled with possibility. Behind me, the house still glowed with warm light, but I knew that inside, nothing was warm anymore. Tomorrow, they would scramble to make sense of me, to realign themselves, to claim a piece of what they had ignored. And maybe one day, I would decide what place they still had in my life. But not tonight. Tonight, I walked into the snow with only the hum of my own certainty. Not as the family's embarrassment, but as the storm they never saw coming.